I'd like to start with the Honourable Minister. What are the top 3 areas that are priority to you when you look at growth and the future of Nigeria?
Sustainable growth. Good morning, everyone. And I'm happy to be here. Thank you for the opportunity. We're a new administration, and this is a very... Being a new administration, this is actually a very important opportunity for us to speak to the world, to explain to the world what we are about, and to also seek support. For us, the most important areas is creating jobs and opportunities for the teeming population that we have in Nigeria, ensuring food security, and of course, national security.
What sectors are good for employment when you look at the job creation strategy?
At the moment, the areas where we've seen huge growth opportunities is in the tech sector. We have a very booming tech sector with huge population of 60% of our population. We have about 240 million people, heavily, very tech savvy, and we've seen a lot of investment coming into this tech sector. Then on the food security priority of the government, we intend to see a lot of investment in the agro value chain. And I think that's one of the areas where we think that we can actually use to ignite SME growth. Because if you're looking at the entire value chain, from planting or cropping or extraction, all the way to export, it involves a lot of things. And all of those areas we're not that sufficient in. Even just the logistics of moving or facilitating trade from the farms to the ports is a lot of investment. And I think that if we can get that right, we will see huge growth in opportunities for both SME growth and job creation.
And global markets have been quite resilient, actually. And Africa, according to the IMF, is posting some pretty good growth in some geographies. I'm interested to know if you could give us a little bit of a big picture view here. What has Coca-Cola's experience been in the past 2 years, say after the pandemic, in Africa?
Yeah, we've been investing in Africa for 95 years. It obviously hasn't been a straight line, but we've been a consistent investor. And we've seen growth rebound post-COVID. Actually, we see a long-term trend. Africa obviously has a tremendous amount of potential going forward. It has almost the youngest billion people on the planet coming up. So there's a lot of long-term growth, and we've seen the growth return. Nigeria leading the way. Kenya's done well. Some of the North African countries, South Africa. Of course, those with macro problems have been a little more difficult. But overall, there's been a strong rebound in Africa, and I think it's all starting to come together.
Where are you looking for that growth now? I mean, you mentioned Nigeria, you mentioned Kenya, but how is Coca-Cola approaching, say, the next 5 years in Africa? Our
approach is to invest steadily. We know that there'll be ups and downs over time, but given the long-term potential of the economies in Africa and Africa in total, we continue to invest. I mean, if you take Nigeria as an example, over the last 10 years, we probably invested $1.3 billion in infrastructure in the marketplace. But in the next 5, we're going to invest $1 billion. So that's almost twice as fast as the previous 10 years. And so that is then replicated across the other African economies, and you see the pace of investment going up, which will obviously reinforce the pace of growth.
Honourable Minister, I mean, obviously Coca-Cola is a huge investor in Africa and has a big value. What more is a country like Nigeria doing to attract more international conglomerates to invest?
I think the first thing to do, I mean, what we've done so far is to, basically to show them the boldness of the current administration. When we started and we took out the first subsidy, that was a very bold move, and then followed by the unification or harmonization of FX rates. That was another bold move. And by showing them the confidence that we have in the economy and that we are we're very strong on ensuring that we have strong institutions to support the policy of the government, we're creating opportunities for investment, basically. So we know that we know what the multinationals want: a fair playing field. They want assurance that the policies will be consistent and transparent. And we're assuring, and with the boldness of the president and by his assurance to the international community, And I think this is what actually can help them to come in.
As Trade Minister, what is your focus when it comes to the AFCFTA, the Continental Area Free Trade Agreement? What is your
Nigeria,
primary focus?
Yes, for me it's about increasing or improving ease of doing business, because for us to be competitive, we have to make sure that our products are very cheap or cost effective so that we can compete. At the moment, for even the manufacturers and those who are in Nigeria, they will tell you that the cost of doing business in Nigeria is quite high because we actually are infrastructure deficit. So we are ensuring that we build those infrastructure. We are soliciting for investment to ensure that that happens, drop the cost of business, improve the ease of doing business, improve trade facilitation, including export, port management, port operations, and that will actually help us to be more competitive. So for me, that's the focus, being more competitive, so that the African or Nigerian SMEs have a chance to actually compete in the global African market space.
Coca-Cola, a beverage, and in the packing and beverage industry, you're probably working on a green transition strategy, right? Can you tell us what is the strategy and how can that help support African business to get into into the value chain?
Sure. I think there are a few things as we grow our business in Africa, actually in the world overall. And we want to make sure it's sustainable. I mean, there can't be a healthy business without a healthy community. And so if you take the beverage industry, just an example, and take the most obvious elements, water, we heavily depend on water. The product doesn't do much without water in it. The packaging itself, and then the carbon footprint it leaves behind. And if you take those three components, we set out on a course to be water neutral globally by 2020. We achieved it by 2015. And so we continue to double down on our strategy of returning to the environment in a usable form all the water we use or more, as in the case we're water positive. And we're going to the next stage, which is making sure that's true not just globally, we're starting to bring it down to each of the manufacturing sites. I mean, the Coke global system has 1,000 manufacturing sites globally. So we need to make sure those plants are really leaving a good water footprint that's positive. On packaging, we have a thing called World Without Waste. The thing about plastic and aluminum and glass packaging materials, they are actually high-value uses of those materials. In other words, if they can be collected, they can easily be made back into new bottles. So a plastic bottle that you drink a Coke or a Coke Zero, you get it back, we can chop it up and we can make a new bottle. And so that generates a lot of business locally because you can create a circular economy around collecting the bottles, recycling them and reusing them in beverages or in other materials. And the other interesting feature of that is the carbon footprint of a recycled circular bottle is vastly lower than a one-off bottle, so it helps on the carbon footprint.
What is the biggest challenge you're facing in the strategy that you're describing?
The biggest challenge actually depends on where you are in the world. In Africa, it's about helping put in the infrastructure to drive up the collection rates. There already is a reasonably high collection rate because these materials have value, and in the end, labor is relatively affordable. We would like to see the materials used in Africa. Let me take an example of Egypt. In the last 5 years, we've gone from collecting no bottles in Egypt to collecting almost all the bottles in Egypt. But those bottles are then sent to Europe to be turned into recycled PET for use in the European marketplaces because the price is higher in Europe than it is in Egypt. We would like, over time, to see those materials be reused in Africa to make it a circular economy in Africa, and it'll create more jobs in Africa.
What are your thoughts on that, Minister?
Yeah, that's actually very interesting, and we will support that. Look, at the moment, we have a high or a huge plastic waste, especially in the big cities. So with this initiative that he's talking about, we should see a reduction in waste, especially plastic, non-recyclable or non-biodegradable waste. So it's a welcome idea or initiative. I just want to encourage other multinationals, especially those in the fast-moving consumer goods sector, to also adopt the same technology to reduce the total amount of non-biodegradable waste.
We talked about the AFCFTA a little bit, but I'm actually interested to know your thoughts also about AGOA. What are your thoughts on that agreement? You know, Nigeria has been quite a big beneficiary of AGOA, and I'm interested to know whether you think Africa should continue to push for an extension of AGOA.
Thank you very much. I think that's a very interesting question and a very topical one. Yes, indeed, Africa has benefited a lot from AGOA. However, it's relative. The total amount of export that we've seen from Africa going into America is about 1.7% of America's total export. That's Africa, compared to India or Bangladesh, that's doing about 10%. So that's why I said it's a bit relative. I think Africa, under the AGOA, benefits a lot, but that quantity has to improve. There is a lot that we can do under AGOA. I'm hoping that with I'm hoping that there's an extension, and that also, before the extension happens, there's a chance for Africa to make an input into the laws or into the constitution that would, or the policies that would, entrench or make the AGOA come again. At the moment, it's been unilateral, so that's been quite not so favorable for Africa, because if we have input into what we think should govern the policies around trade or bilateral trade between Africa and America, then it can actually help us to build more sustainable businesses and industries along that value chain. So we just want more opportunities to make our input contribute to the policies and the decisions that are coming for the AGOA, and that would actually help Africa a lot.
Thank you. As a long-time investor in Africa, as Coca-Cola, what are some of the really big positive changes that you have seen in the African market? And what would you say to colleagues looking to make plays in Africa?
Let me do it in reverse order. Look, I think the reason to invest in Africa, because there's so much structural opportunity ahead. And if you're a business person, you know that trying to get in when it's already happened is quite hard. So get in at the beginning. And now is, it's not the beginning, but it's still early in the economic growth of Africa. So I think it's the right time to go in, the right time to invest. And you can see the changes that happen. You can see the increase in the degree of macro stability and governance, and more kind of market-friendly, if you like, or market-transparent policies coming into place in Africa. The growth of the free trade areas. You can go down lots of statistics. I mean, it's not that long ago where a lot of people had their African head offices outside of Africa because it was easier to fly around Africa from somewhere outside of Africa. And that's starting to break down. We have ours in Africa. So it's really starting to take place. We're knitting the continent together, because I think that's what's going to generate the lower cost. The cost of flying around Africa is coming down. The cost of doing business in Africa is coming down. And that's kind of what's going to galvanize the opportunity for Africa in aggregate and individually to compete, for example, in the exports to the US. They need to be able to punch their weight. But part of that is bringing down the costs of activities, but also bringing down the policy uncertainty. And I think there's good progress.
Final thought?
Africa is still the future of the world, huge growth opportunities, and I think we need to begin to rethink how we invest in Africa. Over time, you notice everyone who want to come into Africa, but they want to come into Africa in their own terms. But I think this is the time we have a more collaborative approach to investing in Africa in a mutually beneficial way. We need to change our approach and even change the way we finance businesses in Africa. You can't use the same standards with how you invest in businesses or finance the developed countries to finance Africa. There are peculiarities, there are lots of issues, but I think that if we can work collaboratively, we can remove those bottlenecks and we can actually forge a greater path together.
Thank you so much. Honourable Minister James Quincey, thank you very much, everyone.